What does it mean if your elbow hurts when lifting? If your elbow hurts when lifting, the most likely cause of it is some sort of tendonitis or tendinopathy, and even more commonly is a specific type of tendinopathy known as tennis elbow or lateral epicondylalgia or lateral epicondylitis. Now, there are other types of tendonitis or tendinopathy, such as biceps tendonitis or golfer's elbow, which is like tennis elbow on the inside of the elbow. But the most common cause of elbow pain when you're lifting is tennis elbow or lateral epicondylalgia. And so I'm going to explain first what you can do to lift more comfortably without having pain on the outside of your elbow. And then at the end of this video, I'll explain a couple tips to help if you have biceps tendonitis or golfer's elbow or medial epicondylalgia. So first of all, what is tennis elbow? Well, it's a problem where the wrist extensor muscles, the muscles that bring the wrist up like this and that supinate or turn the forearm that way, they all attach right at this bump on the outside of the elbow known as the lateral epicondyle. And so lateral epicondylalgia just means pain on the outside of the elbow. Now, commonly that happens when lifting things, sometimes even light things like lifting a cup of coffee. That's a common complaint for people who have lateral epicondyle pain or tennis elbow. And the reason for that is that when you're gripping things, you activate those muscles on the outside of the arm. Now, you'd think that gripping things, it actually uses your wrist flexors, which attach on the inside of the elbow, which would be more likely to cause golfer's elbow, right? But when you're gripping things, if you just use these muscles, your wrist is going to come along with it this way. And so when you're gripping things, you actually use the muscles of your wrist extensors to help stabilize the wrist so that the fingers can close and it doesn't just bring the whole wrist along that way. So that's the reason why people get tennis elbow when they're lifting. Now, how can you prevent that problem? Well, one of the easiest ways is to lift things with a palm up. That when you lift palm up, gravity is helping to pull you down into wrist extension. And so you don't have to use your wrist extensors as much to hold things up. So if you're holding a dumbbell like this, gravity is going to pull it down naturally that way. If you want to lift it up, that takes a whole lot of force out of your wrist extensor muscles to hold it up. So lifting things palm down like this, it doesn't require nearly as much effort out of your wrist extensor muscles because gravity is helping to extend your wrist. Now, when you're doing exercises, for example, curls, or if you get elbow pain when you're benching or doing bench press, just lightening your grip can help as well. But if you're death gripping the weight, then you're going to put a lot more stress on that elbow. If you just let up on your grip a little bit, then you can do your exercises more comfortably. You can see that just doing a bicep curl, you really don't need a whole lot of grip on the weight. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this exercise this way because you could drop the weight on your foot or something like that. But just for example, you really don't need your fingers a whole lot when doing this type of exercise. Now, as you get all the way down to the bottom of the motion, you do need it to grip a little bit more. So limiting your range of motion to where you're not going all the way down, where you don't need quite as much grip, can help a little bit as well. But just loosening up your grip. Same thing when you're doing bench presses. You really can almost do an open palm bench press like that. Again, you don't want to drop the weight on your face, so I would recommend closing your grip around it, but you don't need to squeeze it as tight as possible. So those are some tips to help tennis elbow when you're lifting. Now, what exercises do you do to help strengthen the wrist extensors so that they're not so much of a problem when you are lifting things? Well, largely since it is an overuse injury, you don't want to overdo it. So initially, just doing exercises with the weight of your hand, with your arm like that, very high repetition exercises on the order of 100 to 200 repetitions, broken up into sets of 10s or 20s as your symptoms allow. So just doing, say, maybe 10 repetitions, and then waiting for 10 seconds or so. And then after 10 seconds, doing another set of 10 repetitions, and then waiting another 10 seconds or so. That can be a good way to strengthen your wrist extensors. And again, you don't need brute strength. What you actually need is aerobic endurance of those muscles, the ability for them to work for long periods of time. For example, when holding your wrist up when typing or when playing a piano or things like that. Those are the times when people with tennis elbow have the most problems, when they're doing a repetitive activity over time. So how else can you strengthen those muscles? To strengthen your muscles, you want to use a lighter weight. And this is 5 pounds. That's even a lot to start out with if you have tennis elbow. So like I mentioned, just going up that way with your wrist. And then when you can add a little bit of weight, I'd recommend starting with a pound or two and then just adding a little bit at a time, still doing that same 10 sets of 10 or 10 sets of 20, 100 to 200 total repetitions. And that builds up the endurance or the oxygen carrying capacity of your muscles and of your tendons. So that's tennis elbow or lateral epicondylalgia. Now, what about other types of tendinopathy that you might get when you're lifting? For example, golfer's elbow. Well, that I mentioned is just the opposite problem as tennis elbow. And so doing a lot of wrist flexion type activities like that can potentially give you tennis elbow, or I'm sorry, golfer's elbow. So, again, limiting how much you're doing. I mentioned lifting palm up is good for tennis elbow. So palm down can be helpful for golfer's elbow. And then doing the same repetitive wrist flexion activities instead of extension. So tennis elbow, you do extension. Golfer's elbow, you do flexion. Again, 100 to 200 total reps broken down into sets of 10 to 20 reps at a time. And then adding weight as that gets easier. So that's golfer's elbow. Now, what about biceps tendinopathy? Your biceps tendon attaches down into your elbow right here. It is a supinator of your forearm, which means it turns palms up. So when you're doing a biceps curl, if you have your palm up, that's the maximum activation of your bicep muscle. If you do a palm down bicep curl, which isn't really a bicep curl, but if you do a palm down arm curl, that uses the least activation out of your bicep muscle. So if you do want to be able to strengthen your arms, but take some of the load off your bicep tendon, you can try doing a palm down curl, which uses a muscle that sits underneath of your biceps. It's kind of deeper down underneath of your biceps, and it's actually a bigger muscle than your bicep. It's called the brachialis. And just going up and down like that helps strengthen your brachialis. You also have another muscle, your brachioradialis, right here in your forearm, that helps with elbow flexion or doing arm curls. So doing a curl like this, where your arm is this way, it helps strengthen your brachioradialis muscle right here in your arm. So those are some tips to help you lift more comfortably without having elbow pain. Now, if you do need some more help for tennis elbow or golfer's elbow or biceps tendonitis, and you happen to be in St. Louis, we'd be happy to help you out at More for Life. Just give us a call and we'll get you in for an appointment and get it checked out. And if you happen to be watching this video from somewhere else, but you found these tips helpful, give the video a like and subscribe to our channel so you can get notified of our future videos. Thanks for watching and have a great day.